She laughed. That sharp little laugh while telling her friend, "Your mom changed the password. I can't use her Amex anymore." I was standing 5 feet away, holding the same credit card she'd been draining behind my back for months. But that wasn't the worst of it. No, what shattered me was hearing my own son say I might need memory tests, that I was confused, as if I hadn't balanced his father's business books for 30 years, as if I couldn't read a statement. They didn't just steal money, they stole my name, my trust, my mind. But they forgot who taught me to fight with facts. I changed more than the password, and now I'm building a paper trail that'll bury them in their own lies. My name is Margaret Collins, and I'm 75 years old. Each morning, I tend to my bungalow on Maple Street, where I've lived since Tom and I married 48 years ago. The house holds steady rhythms, morning tea with cardamom, weekly dusting with lemon oil, and the gentle creak of my porch swing. My son Darren visits on Sundays with his wife Jessica, though her smiles never quite reach her eyes when she calls her shopping family expenses on my Amex card. Tom taught me the importance of keeping precise records during his 30 years at the bank. Every receipt, every statement sits filed by month in my credenza, a habit that served me well since he passed. I may be a widow living alone, but numbers don't lie. My fingers brush the neat rows of paperwork. But let me start from the beginning. It was a Tuesday evening in October when my world shifted. You know those moments when everything seems perfectly normal until it isn't? That was one of them. The kettle whistled its familiar song while I sat at my dining room table, evening light painting shadows across my open ledger. I'd always found peace in these quiet hours, matching receipts to statements, keeping my finances orderly the way Tom had taught me. The house settled around me with familiar creaks and sighs, smelling of the pot roast I'd made for dinner. Through the partially open window, the maple leaves rustled, nature's whispered lullaby. I had just finished totaling my monthly expenses when Jessica's voice carried from the kitchen. She must have come in through the back door, something she'd taken to doing lately without knocking. "Darling, your mom changed the password. I can't use her Amex card anymore." My pen froze mid-stroke. Jessica's laugh tinkled through her phone's speaker, sharp and entitled. "I know, right? Such a pain. I'll have to figure something else out." Have you ever felt your stomach drop and your mind race all at once? That's what happened as pieces clicked into place, those family expenses that had been showing up on my statements. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my recent credit card bills. There it was, $479 at Nordstrom, marked as family groceries. A $289 spa day labeled household maintenance. Even a $750 charge at some boutique I'd never heard of, documented as family necessities. My reading glasses slipped down my nose as I leaned closer, highlighting each suspicious entry. The yellow marker made stark lines across the paper, too many lines. I grabbed my small notebook, the one with the cardinal on the cover that Tom had given me for Christmas years ago, and began copying dates and amounts. July 15th, $479, August 3rd, $289, August 21st, $750. The list grew longer. My chest tightened as I realized this had been going on for months. How had I missed it? I'd trusted family. Wasn't that what you were supposed to do? Deep breaths, Margaret, I whispered to myself, the way I used to when the children were small and testing my patience. I needed to handle this carefully. They already treated me like I was losing my edge, making comments about my senior moments whenever I questioned anything. I took out a fresh sheet of paper and started drafting what I would say. I've noticed some unusual charges. No, too vague. There seemed to be discrepancies. Better, but still not quite right. I had to be direct, but diplomatic. The kitchen light clicked off, and Jessica's heels clicked across the tile toward the front door. I heard her car start up and pull away, probably heading home to meet Darren. Speaking of my son, headlights swept across my front windows right on schedule, Darren coming home from work. The garage door hummed open, then closed. My heart picked up speed as his key turned in the lock. The kitchen light clicked on. It was time. Looking down at my carefully documented evidence, I smoothed my cardigan and took one last deep breath. The pages of proof felt solid under my fingers, grounding me. My son's footsteps approached the dining room, and I straightened my spine. I might be 75, but I wasn't born yesterday. And I certainly wasn't going to let anyone, not even family, take advantage of my trust. Tom's voice echoed in my memory. Numbers don't lie, Maggie. They tell the real story if you know how to read them. Well, I knew how to read them. And this story needed to end. The kitchen light flicked off, and Darren's footsteps moved toward the living room. I gathered my papers and stood, my knees protesting as I made my way to the coffee table. The familiar scent of lemon furniture polish filled the air as I spread the statements out in neat rows. Mom? What's all this? Darren appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. His briefcase dropped with a soft thud by the armchair. Sit down, dear. We need to discuss some charges on my credit card. I kept my voice gentle, the way I used to when explaining difficult things to him as a child. Remember when I taught him about saving birthday money? That same patient tone. He sank into the chair, running a hand through his graying hair, so like his father's. What? Charges? These. I pointed to the highlighted lines. Nordstrom, $479. The Royal Day Spa, $289. Boutique Nouveau, $750, all marked as family expenses or household items. Oh, Mom. He leaned back, a dismissive smile playing at his lips. Jessica mentioned you might be confused about some of the shopping she did for the house. My fingers traced the edge of a statement. I'm not confused, Darren. These are designer clothes and spa treatments. Not household necessities. I need the charges repaid and all my passwords removed from Jessica's phone. Come on, you're misreading this. He picked up a statement, then set it down without really looking. Jessica helps manage your expenses. Remember? We talked about this. I remember everything we discussed. The heat crept up my neck. We agreed she could help with groceries and basic supplies, not luxury shopping. Mom. His voice took on that patronizing tone I'd grown to dread. Maybe it's time we talked about getting you some tests done. Early senility can... I am not senile. The words came out sharper than I intended. I pulled a receipt from the pile. This spa charge was made while I was at my doctor's appointment. The same appointment where they confirmed my mental acuity is perfectly fine. Movement caught my eye. Jessica stood in the doorway, arms crossed, designer. Purse still hanging from her elbow. Her expression suggested I was the intruder here in my own living room. Really, Margaret? She stepped in, stilettos clicking on the hardwood. We're doing this again? I thought we settled the shopping issue last month. We never discussed any shopping. I kept my voice steady, despite the trembling in my hands. And I'd appreciate you removing my card information from your phone. See? Darren gestured. Toward me, speaking to Jessica. This is exactly what I meant. She's forgetting conversations we've had. I forget nothing, but my dignity was slipping away with each exchange. The room felt smaller, warmer, as they shared knowing looks over my head. With mechanical movements, I began gathering the statements. My fingers, usually so sure with papers, fumbled slightly as I slid them into their folder, the one labeled Amex Review in my neat handwriting. Mom, let's talk about this tomorrow when you're feeling more. Darren paused, choosing his words. Clear-headed, I watched them move to the hallway, heads bent together, whispering. The front door opened and closed with a soft click that seemed to echo through the suddenly empty room. Through the window, I could see them standing on the porch, faces lit by phone screens. Jessica's laugh drifted in, that same sharp sound from earlier. So dramatic, she hissed, thumbs tapping away at her phone. I sat there, the folder heavy in my lap, surrounded by furniture I'd polished that morning. The chair where Tom used to read his evening paper, the table where we'd taught Darren his multiplication tables. All these memories, clear as crystal, while my own son suggested I was losing my mind. You know that feeling when someone you love looks right through you? When they hear your words but don't really listen? That's what burned most. Not the stolen money, but the stolen respect. I waited until the house settled into that deep nighttime quiet before pulling out my husband's old brass magnifying glass. Tom had used it for stamp collecting. I could almost smell the musty albums he'd pored over every Sunday. Now I was hunting for something else entirely. The dining room table became my command center. Calendar on the side left, credit statements fanned out on the right, and my trusty green ledger dead center. I'd always kept meticulous records. You don't balance books for a construction company without developing habits. Let's see what you've been up to, Jessica dear. My whisper sounded loud in the empty room. Line by line, I cross-referenced each charge against my calendar. There it was, a $375 charge at Le Petit Boutique on the same Wednesday she'd told. Darren, she was having lunch with the girls. A $280 spa treatment when she was supposedly picking up groceries. I circled each one in red, my pen pressing harder than necessary. The merchant codes told their own story. Every legitimate household purchase had specific codes: groceries, utilities, maintenance. But these other charges, all coded as retail or personal services. Nothing vague about that. Something caught my eye on the shipping. Details. I adjusted my glasses, squinting through the magnifying glass. The address listed wasn't my bungalow. No, these packages went to Unit 12, Harbor View Apartments. My hands shook slightly as I reached for the phone. The Amex customer service line was open 24/7, one of the reasons I'd kept the card all these years. American Express, this is Marcus. How can I help you tonight? Hello, Marcus. I need to verify some recent activity on my account. I gave him my details, voice steady despite the late hour. I see several authorized users on this account, Mrs. Collins. Are you inquiring about specific charges? Yes, and I'd like to request a temporary freeze for security purposes. While Marcus processed my request, I heard a car door slam outside. Jessica's voice drifted through the thin walls, followed by Darren's lower tones. Need to fix her accounts before she really causes problems. Jessica's words were clear enough. The old woman's getting paranoid. I thanked Marcus and hung up just as the printer hummed to life. The fresh statement felt cold in my hands, appropriate, given the chill running down my spine as I added up the total. 3 months of pension payments, gone, not on medicine or repairs or even those little luxuries Tom always said I deserved. No, spent on someone else's indulgences while they plotted to fix my accounts. The mailbox clattered outside, and I heard envelopes hit the floor with a soft thump. More bills, no doubt, more evidence of their betrayal. I sat there, surrounded by paper proof of their deception, remembering how Tom used to say, "Numbers never lie." He was right about that. Numbers were telling me a story now, one of calculated theft dressed up as family help. The magnifying glass caught the lamplight, sending a bright spot dancing across my careful notations. All those circles and annotations formed a pattern as clear as any of Tom's beloved stamp collections. The difference was, this pattern showed me exactly how much trust could be worth in dollars and cents. My pension check wouldn't arrive for another 2 weeks. The next credit card bill would come sooner. I could hear Jessica and Darren still talking outside, their voices carrying plans I couldn't quite make out. But their tone told me enough. They weren't finished yet. The night deepened around me as I gathered the papers into neat stacks, each one colder than the last against my fingers. The evidence was clear now. The question was, what would I do with it? Morning light streamed through my kitchen window as I sorted the mail that had clattered through the slot last night. My tea went cold beside me, forgotten as I opened envelope after envelope. Each one hit me like a fresh slap. Discover card, Chase, Bank of America. I'd never applied for any of these. My hands trembled as I spread the statements across my morning table. The same table where Tom and I had shared breakfast for 42 years. You know how some moments stick in your memory like photographs? This was one I wished I could forget. This can't be right, I whispered, though I knew exactly what I was looking at. Identity theft. Plain and simple. I picked up the Chase statement, bringing it closer to my reading glasses. There it was, my name, my address, but not my signature. The strokes were all wrong. Tom had taught me to study signatures when I helped with his business paperwork. The devil's in the details, Maggie, he'd always said. The total across all 3 cards made my stomach lurch. Over $15,000 in new debt, and climbing. I reached for the phone, dialed Darren's number. My son would help once he saw this new evidence. He had to. Mom, he sounded irritated already. I'm heading into a meeting. Darren, someone's opened credit cards in my name. The signatures are forged. I need you to help me report this. Mom, stop. His sigh crackled through the line. Jessica already told me you were getting worked up about the bills again. This isn't about the Amex anymore. These are new accounts. Look, he cut in. Maybe Jessica is right. You should think about selling the house. Downsizing would take the pressure off. Stop stressing about every little expense. My throat tightened. Those weren't my son's words. They were hers. The same phrases she'd been dropping for months. Downsizing, stop stressing, take the pressure off. Darren, please just listen. I've got to go, Mom. We'll talk about this later. The line went dead. I sat there for a moment, phone heavy in my hand. Then I straightened my shoulders and pulled out my address book. If my own son wouldn't help, I'd handle this myself. First call. Discover Card Fraud Department. 20 minutes on hold, then another 30 explaining the situation. They flagged the account and started a dispute file. Chase took even longer. The representative kept asking me to verify information I'd never provided in the first place, but I stayed calm, kept pushing. By the time I hung up, another fraud case was opened. Bank of America promised to call back within 2 business days. I wrote down the reference number in my ledger, adding it to my growing list of case numbers and callback dates. The kitchen timer sat on my counter, the old mechanical one Tom had bought me when we first moved in. I twisted it to 30 minutes and started sketching out a timeline. You see, I knew how billing cycles worked. Each statement had a closing date. Once that hit, any charges became permanent, harder to dispute. I marked each deadline in red, drawing arrows to show the domino effect if I missed even one. At the bottom of the page, I wrote in careful block letters, deadline, act before statements post. The words stared back at me, a countdown I couldn't ignore. My phone buzzed, Jessica's name, lighting up the screen. I watched it ring, remembering how she'd laughed on her call last night, how she'd dismissed me as paranoid while systematically destroying my credit. The timer ticked steadily beside me, each click reminding me that time wasn't on my side. Soon, these fraudulent charges would lock in, and my financial independence would slip away, just as she'd planned. My phone kept buzzing, her name flashing like a warning. I've always found comfort in numbers. They don't lie if you know how to read them. So after those morning calls, I did what I do best. I pulled out my old accounting notebook and started making sense of the chaos. You ever notice how spreading everything out on paper makes it real? There I sat at my dining room table, the afternoon sun warming my cardigan, creating the kind of spreadsheet that would have made Tom proud. Column by column, I logged every unauthorized charge, date, merchant, amount, and what Jessica claimed each was for. Family expenses seemed to mean designer handbags and spa days these days. My pension check would hit the account next Tuesday, $2,147 after taxes. I'd managed just fine on that amount for years, keeping a tidy cushion in savings. But now, I drew a line down the page, totaling up the minimum payments that would come due. The number at the bottom made my tea go cold in my cup. 3 weeks, I whispered to myself. That's all it'll take to drain everything. I remember the exact moment the reality sank in. The kitchen clock struck 4, and I realized I'd been working straight through lunch. My hand ached from writing, but I couldn't stop. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about survival. The creditors had started emailing fraud affidavits. I printed each one, starting a new folder labeled Fraud Documentation. The identity theft forms from the FTC website went in next. 42 pages of forms, all requiring details I'd have to verify multiple times. My sticky notepad, the yellow one I've had since Tom passed, became my battle plan. I covered the refrigerator with them, each one a task I couldn't afford to miss. Freeze credit, all bureaus. Replace compromised cards. File police report if required. Document all. Conversations. The bank's fraud department went straight to voicemail. I left what I hoped was a calm message. This is Margaret Collins. I need to report identity theft and unauthorized accounts. Please call back as soon as possible. It's urgent. Looking at those sticky notes, I felt my age creeping up on me. How was I supposed to get to all these places? My arthritis makes driving tricky on good days, and these weren't good days. I tried. Darren, one more time. Honey, I need a ride to the bank this week. It's important. His sigh came through loud and clear. Mom, I'm really busy with work right now. It would only take an hour. Look, I'll try to stop by on the weekend, okay? But we both knew he wouldn't. The sun was setting by then, casting long shadows across my living room. I did my usual evening routine, checking the locks, drawing the curtains. My hands shook a little. More than usual as I turned the deadbolt. The house felt bigger somehow, emptier. You know that feeling when you're up against something huge and you're not sure you can handle it alone? That's where I was, standing in my darkening hallway, wondering how many more days I had before everything fell apart. That's when I heard it. Footsteps on my front walk. Not the quick clip of Jessica's heels or Darren's hurried stride. These were slower. Steadier. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps followed by 2 quick ones. I froze. I knew that pattern. It was how Walter, Tom's old friend from the accounting firm, had always announced himself when he dropped by with tax questions for my husband. Through the peephole, Walter's familiar silhouette brought back memories of tax seasons when Tom was alive, the 3 of us sharing coffee while they pored over forms. I opened the door, and there he stood, looking exactly as he had at Tom's funeral 2 years ago. Pressed khakis, crisp button-down, and that same kind smile behind wire-rimmed glasses. Margaret, he said softly, holding up a paper bag that smelled of cinnamon and butter. I heard through Martha at Bridge Club that you might need a second set of eyes on some numbers. My hands trembled as I gestured him inside. Walter, I don't even know where to start. Start by letting me see the whole pile, he said, following me to the dining room. Every statement, every receipt, every note you've made. I'd forgotten how quickly Walter could read a room. His eyes swept over my makeshift command center, folders fanned across the table, sticky notes creating a yellow constellation on the fridge, and my notebook opened to columns of red-circled numbers. First things first, he said, setting down the pastry bag and pulling out a chair. We need to establish proper documentation procedures. He settled into his accountant's posture, shoulders squared, reading glasses perched just so. Everything we do from here on needs to be admissible. Admissible? The word felt heavy in my mouth. For legal proceedings, Margaret, we're creating a paper trail that needs to hold up under scrutiny. He picked up one of my annotated statements. Good instincts here, but let's do this properly. For the next hour, Walter taught me how to handle evidence. Never write on originals, he explained, showing me how to make clean copies and date each annotation. Chain of custody matters. Every document needs to tell its own story. When you received it, who handled it, what actions you took. I watched his steady hands demonstrate proper notation techniques, remembering how he'd taught Tom the same careful methods decades ago, the eye. Familiar smell of cinnamon rolls mixed with the sharp scent of highlighter ink as Walter walked me through each step. See these transaction codes? He pointed to a string of numbers I'd been puzzling over. We need to preserve the metadata. That's the electronic fingerprint of each purchase. Print fresh copies of your online statements before anyone can alter them. I nodded, taking notes in my careful handwriting. Jessica's been changing the category labels to hide purchases. Exactly why we need the original merchant codes. Walter pulled out my calendar and started marking dates. We'll cross-reference everything against your daily entries. Where were you when these charges were made? What receipts should exist? He circled the next billing cycle date in red ink, writing critical cutoff in his precise capital letters. This is our deadline, Margaret. After this date. Disputing. Charges becomes much harder. I felt my chest tighten. That's less than 3 weeks. Which is why we're meeting again tomorrow morning. Walter started organizing papers into new folders, labeling each one with clear purpose. Original statements, correspondence, dispute documents. I don't know how to thank you, I said, watching him create order from my chaos. Thank me by getting some rest tonight, he replied, standing and straightening his collar. You'll need a clear head tomorrow. We're going to request receipt copies from every merchant, and that takes patience. I walked him to the door, steadier than I'd felt in days but still terrified of the ticking clock. Having a plan helped, yet the scope of what we faced made my hands cold. One day at a time, Margaret, Walter said, patting my shoulder. Tom always said you were the most organized woman he'd ever met. That's exactly what we need now. I stood on the porch, watching his taillights disappear down the street, the evening air carrying a hint of autumn. Inside, my phone buzzed against the table. Another unknown number, another creditor calling about accounts I never opened. Morning light streamed through the dining room windows as I settled into my familiar chair, armed with Walter's color-coded system and a fresh pot of Earl Grey. You know that. Feeling when a scattered puzzle suddenly shows its pattern? That's what his organization method did for my scattered evidence. I separated the charges into 3 categories, just as he'd taught me. Green tabs for confirmed fraud, yellow for suspicious transactions, and red for the most damaging proof. Charges made when Jessica was definitely elsewhere. My hands stayed steady as I worked, probably because this felt like the bookkeeping I'd done. All those years for Tom's business. Remember those old ledger books with their perfect columns? This wasn't so different. The merchant calls started at 9 sharp. This is Margaret Collins, I'd say, keeping my voice clear and professional. I'm requesting copies of receipts for the following transactions. Some clerks were helpful right away, others needed supervisors, but I noted every name and time in my contact log. Ma'am, I'm showing a delivery address different from your billing, one clerk said. It went to a Jessica Collins on Oak Street. My pen barely trembled as I wrote, confirmation, delivery to JC, timestamp 10:17 a.m. Each call added another brick to our wall of evidence. The emails started arriving by 11. Scanned receipts, delivery confirmations, transaction records. Would you believe Jessica didn't even try to hide her signature? Every document went into my evidence receipts folder, each one labeled with date received and source. Walter's voice echoed in my head. Chain of custody, Margaret. Every paper tells its story. I was comparing signature samples when Walter knocked at noon, right on schedule. He carried a legal pad and that same encouraging smile that had helped Tom through tax seasons decades ago. Show me what you've done, he said, settling into the chair beside me. I walked him. Through my morning's work, the color-coded tabs, the contact logs, the growing stack of merchant confirmations, his eyes crinkled with approval. Perfect, Margaret. This is exactly what we need. He flipped through the binder, nodding at my detailed notes. But remember, we can't move too quickly. Why not? I asked, thinking of the billing cycle deadline circled in red on my calendar. Because hasty accusations give them room to spin. Stories, Walter explained, pulling out his legal pad. Right now, they think you're confused, maybe even scared. That works in our favor. Let them keep thinking that while we build our case. He showed me how to draft an affidavit that would speak louder than any emotional confrontation. We listed each charge, each confirmation, each piece of evidence that proved intent. The numbers told their own story. One Jessica couldn't easily explain. Away. See how this builds? Walter asked, pointing to our timeline. Each transaction connects to the next, showing pattern and purpose. That's what the court needs to see. We spent the next hour making identical copies, one for the court, one for creditors, one for American Express. My signature looked strong and clear at the bottom of each affidavit, nothing like the shaky hand I'd had days ago. Keep everything locked up, Walter advised as we packed the files into a sturdy box. And Margaret? Don't let them provoke you into showing our cards too soon. I slid the box under my bed, right next to the shoebox where I'd kept Tom's love letters all these years. Funny how the most important papers in our lives end up under beds, isn't it? My phone buzzed just as Walter was leaving. A text from my son, coming by tonight to talk about selling. I looked at Walter, my heart suddenly racing. Remember, he said softly, patience multiplies credibility. Let them talk. We'll let the evidence speak when the time is right. Have you ever noticed how a room feels different when you're waiting for a fight? I arranged 3 chairs in a triangle. No couch tonight, no casual sprawling. The recorder sat right there on the mantel where they couldn't miss it, red light steady as a watching eye. Tom always said proper preparation prevents poor performance. 5 Ps, he called it, and tonight I needed every one. My hands were surprisingly steady as I heard their car pull up. Maybe it was knowing Walter's blueprint by heart, or maybe just the comfort of having everything documented and organized. The way my mother taught me to face hard conversations. Back straight, facts ready, emotions in check. The front door opened without a knock. They'd gotten bold that way lately. Jessica swept in first, designer purse swinging, my son Michael trailing behind with that worried look he'd worn since childhood storms. "Mom, we need to talk about—" Michael started. "I know," I cut in, gesturing to the chairs. "Please, sit, both of you." My voice came out clearer than I'd expected. Jessica's eyes caught the recorder, narrowed slightly. "What's that for?" "Documentation," I said simply. "I've filed fraud disputes with all creditors, and my credit is now frozen pending investigation." The words felt strong in my mouth, like stones dropped one by one into still water. "Oh my God," Jessica laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "This is exactly what we mean about paranoid behavior. Michael, tell her." Michael shifted in his chair. "Mom, we're worried about you. These accusations—" "These aren't accusations," I said, keeping my voice level. "They're documented facts. Every charge, every delivery address, every signature that isn't mine, it's all filed with dates and merchant confirmations." "Those were family expenses," Jessica's voice rose sharply. "We've been helping you manage—" "Spa days are not family expenses," I said. "Neither are designer handbags delivered to Oak Street." I watched her face flush. "The billing cycle closes next week. I have a meeting scheduled with the bank's fraud department." Michael started to speak, but I held up my hand. The gesture surprised me as much as it did him. When had I last interrupted my son? "If either of you attempts to interfere with these investigations or open any new accounts in my name, legal counsel will become necessary." The words came out just as Walter had helped me practice them. "Legal counsel?" Jessica's laugh turned bitter. "Against family? Michael, are you hearing this?" Michael nodded, along with her, but I saw uncertainty creep into his expression. Good. Let him wonder. Let him finally start questioning. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. The fraud department's email confirmation appeared on the screen. Appointment confirmed, Tuesday 9 a.m. I picked up my reading glasses, connected my phone to the printer Walter had helped me set up, and watched their faces as the confirmation page emerged. Jessica's mouth tightened as I placed the paper precisely in the center of the coffee table. "This is ridiculous," she said, standing abruptly. "We're trying to help you downsize, live more sensibly, and you're treating us like criminals." "The evidence will speak for itself," I said, thinking of Walter's words. "I'm simply protecting my assets and my credit." They left shortly after, Jessica's heels clicking angrily on the porch steps, Michael casting one confused glance back at me before closing the door. I waited until their car started before letting out a long breath. The morning mail arrived just as I was putting away the chairs. There, in a formal envelope with the county courthouse logo, was my hearing date for injunctive relief. The red stamp caught the morning light. Next Wednesday, 2 days before the billing cycle deadline. I walked to the kitchen and pinned the notice to my calendar right next to Walter's careful timeline. The red circle around the billing deadline suddenly looked less threatening. The morning air had that special crispness you only get in early fall, the kind that reminds you of first days of school and fresh starts. Walter met me at 7 sharp, his tie perfectly straight, carrying a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "Ready?" he asked, helping me load the file box into his trunk. I smoothed my cardigan, the blue one I'd worn to every important occasion since James passed. As I'll ever be. You know those moments when your whole life seems to balance on a knife's edge? That's how it felt walking up those courthouse steps, my sensible shoes clicking against marble that had seen thousands of stories like mine. The security guard smiled as he x-rayed our box. "Evidence?" he asked kindly. "Truth," I answered, and his eyes crinkled with understanding. We found our assigned courtroom easily enough. Courtroom C, all dark wood and gravity. Michael and Jessica were already there with their lawyer, heads bent together in whispered conversation. My son wouldn't meet my eyes. Jessica, though, she stared right through me like I was already gone. Walter helped me unpack our materials at the plaintiff's table. Everything labeled, everything in order, just as we'd practiced. The judges. Nameplate read, Anya Patricia Martinez. And something about her reminded me of my old high school principal, the kind who could spot a lie at 50 paces. "All rise," the bailiff called, and we stood as Judge Martinez entered, her robes flowing like black wings. "Collins versus Collins," she announced, settling into her chair, "regarding allegations of financial fraud and identity theft. Let's begin with the plaintiff's evidence." I stood, steadier than I'd expected. "Your Honor, I've prepared a chronological record of unauthorized charges and account access." I handed the first binder to the clerk. "Proceed," Judge Martinez said, adjusting her glasses. One by one, I walked through our exhibits, the Amex statements with highlighted charges, the merchant receipts showing Jessica's signature, not mine, the delivery confirmations to addresses I'd never lived at. Each piece clicking into place, like the accounting puzzles I used to solve for James's business. "And these signatures?" the judge asked, holding up 2 documents side by side. "The top one is mine, from my driver's license. The bottom one is from a credit application I never saw." Jessica's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client had verbal authorization for all purchases as a family member managing household expenses." "Is that so?" Judge Martinez raised an eyebrow. "And these spa treatments in Palm Springs? Those were household expenses?" "Family care is broad in scope," the lawyer argued, but I could see the judge wasn't buying it. Then came the bank records. The clerk projected them onto the large monitor, and I heard Michael's sharp intake of breath beside me. "Can someone explain this recurring transfer?" Judge Martinez pointed to a line item. "It's labeled House Equity Reserve, but I'm not seeing corresponding documentation." The courtroom went still. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. "That's—" Jessica started, then stopped. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white against the dark wood. Walter's hand touched my shoulder briefly. "Steady, steady." Michael was staring at the screen, his face draining of color. I watched my son's eyes move between the numbers and his wife, searching for something that would make this make sense. The lost little boy look was back, but this time it wasn't aimed at me. "Your Honor," Jessica's lawyer began, but the judge held up her hand. "I'm seeing multiple transfers to an account number that doesn't match any of the household records submitted." Judge Martinez removed her glasses. "I'd like to review these transactions in chambers. Court will recess for 30 minutes while I examine these records more closely." "Vicky." Gavel cracked like summer thunder. "Mom?" Michael's voice was barely a whisper as the judge left the bench. The question in it broke my heart and steeled my spine at the same time. Jessica's lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear now. She sat rigid in her chair, staring straight ahead at nothing. Walter helped me gather our remaining documents as the clerk collected the exhibits. "Steady now," he murmured. "The truth's doing its work." I nodded, watching the judge's door close behind her. 30 minutes. After months of betrayal and careful planning, everything would turn on what she found in those bank records. The bailiff checked his watch. The clock on the wall ticked. And we waited. The 30 minutes felt like 3 hours. I'd spent decades balancing books and tracking numbers, but never had math made my hands shake like this. Walter kept offering me sips from his water. Bottle. But my throat was too tight to swallow. You know that moment when you're about to sneeze? That suspended instant before everything breaks loose? The whole courtroom felt like that when Judge Martinez returned to the bench. The bailiff's all rise made me jump. I steadied myself against the table as the judge settled into her chair, arranging papers with the careful precision of someone about to deliver significant news. "Be seated," she said, and the scrape of chairs filled the room. During recess, I examined the banking records in detail, particularly the transfers marked as House Equity Reserve. What I found requires immediate attention. She lifted a document, and I swear the paper crackled like lightning in the hushed room. The court has uncovered evidence of systematic fund diversion to an account at Midwest Savings, account number ending in 4721. This account is solely controlled by the defendant, Jessica Collins, with no joint access granted to her husband or mother-in-law. Michael's breathing turned audible beside me. I wanted to reach for him, but my arms felt leaden. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court reviewed text messages submitted with the bank records. She adjusted her glasses. I'll read one exchange from March 15th. "Once the old lady's house sells, we'll have enough liquidation cash. I'll file the papers and be gone before anyone realizes." The gallery erupted in whispers. I remembered that date. It was the day Jessica had brought me daffodils and talked about how much easier life would be in a nice retirement community. "Your Honor," Jessica's lawyer stood quickly. "We request a brief continuance to address these new findings." Denied. Judge Martinez's tone could have frozen coffee. "The evidence is clear and present in the submitted records. This court finds compelling proof of premeditated fraud." I glanced at Michael. His face had gone the color of old paste, his eyes fixed on Jessica. She sat perfectly still, like a statue, but her fingernails were digging half-moons into her palms. "The court enters the following immediate orders," Judge Martinez declared. "First, a fraud determination is entered against Jessica Collins. Sentencing will be scheduled within 30 days. The scratch of reporters' pens filled the silence. Second, immediate injunctive relief is granted to protect Margaret Collins's property and credit. All existing liens or claims against her home are hereby frozen pending review. The defendant is prohibited from any contact with Margaret Collins's financial accounts or property." Walter's hand found mine under the table and squeezed once, firm, steady, like the numbers we'd tracked so carefully. "Third, the court orders full financial disclosure from Jessica Collins within 48 hours, including all accounts, properties, and transfers dating back 3 years." I heard a soft, "Oh God," from Michael's direction. Mrs. Collins, the judge addressed me directly, do you understand these findings? I stood, my voice clearer than I'd expected. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Collins, she turned to my son, given these revelations about your wife's intentions regarding your joint assets, you may wish to seek separate counsel. Michael nodded numbly. Jessica still hadn't moved. Court officers will escort Mrs. Jessica Collins to process the preliminary orders. Judge Martinez gathered her papers. We're adjourned. The gallery erupted in murmurs as neighbors leaned together, whispering. I recognized Mrs. Henderson from church, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. 2. Reporters were already scribbling furiously in their notebooks. As the bailiff approached Jessica, I finally looked directly at her. The careful mask she'd worn all these months had cracked, showing something hard and angry underneath. But it didn't frighten me anymore. Numbers don't lie, and neither did Judge Martinez. Walter stood beside me, steady as always. You did it, Margaret. The truth won out. I watched the bailiff lead Jessica toward the side door, her designer heels clicking sharply on the courthouse floor. The same shoes she'd bought with my Amex card, I realized with a strange, distant clarity. Mom? Michael's voice cracked on that single syllable. I turned to my son, seeing the little boy who once brought me dandelions mixed with the man who'd nearly lost everything to a beautiful lie. But before either of us could speak, the judge's clerk approached with forms for me to sign. The truth had landed. Now we had to live with it. Have you ever noticed how different your home feels after you've been away during something momentous? That's how it struck me when Walter dropped me off that afternoon. My little bungalow seemed both familiar and strange, like seeing an old friend who'd aged overnight. I didn't waste time. The locksmith, Mr. Rodriguez, arrived within the hour. I'd called his shop from the courthouse steps, right after Walter suggested changing the locks. Smart move, Mr. Rodriguez said as he worked on the front door. Nothing says fresh start like new keys. The steady rasp of his tools felt oddly comforting. While he moved to the back door, I called Hanson's Painting. They'd done work for me before, back when Tom was alive. We used to joke about their slogan, "We make your neighbors jealous." The scheduler promised a crew first thing tomorrow. What color were you thinking, Mrs. Collins? I glanced at my garden, where late summer flowers still bobbed in the breeze. Meadow sage, I said, a soft blue-gray. Tom would have liked that. He always said our porch should match the sky. Mr. Rodriguez left me with 3 shiny keys on a ring and a pat on the shoulder. Good luck, Senora. The new locks made such a crisp sound when they turned. No more wondering who might walk in uninvited. I spent the next hour at my dining room table, drafting letters to the creditors. The court's determination made everything clearer now. No more fighting to prove what I knew was true. I kept the wording simple and attached Judge Martinez's orders. Walter had taught me well. Document everything, stay professional. The familiar scratch of my pen on paper brought back memories of balancing Tom's business books years ago. Back then, I'd sit in this same spot, recording every penny while steam curled up from my teacup. Numbers never lied to me then, and they hadn't lied to me now. When Michael's car pulled up around dusk, I was ready. I watched through the living room window as he stood on the walkway, hands in his pockets. He looked lost, smaller somehow. The sun who'd once towered over me with such certainty, now uncertain of his welcome. I opened the door but stayed in the doorframe. Hello, Michael. Mom. His voice caught. I don't know where to start. The truth might help, I said quietly. He nodded, eyes on the ground. I was blind. Worse than blind, I chose not to see. When you tried to tell me about the credit cards, about Jessica's spending, I convinced myself you were confused. It was easier than admitting she was. He trailed off. Using us both, I finished for him. Yes. He looked up then, and I saw tears. Can you ever forgive me? The question hung between us like smoke. Part of me wanted to rush down those steps and hold him, like I did when he was small. But we weren't in that story anymore. Forgiveness takes time, I said. And trust takes longer. We'll need some ground rules. Anything, he said quickly. You don't get access to my accounts, not ever again. My finances stay separate from yours, and I'll need to see proof you're getting counseling about money management. He nodded, wiping his eyes. We can have Sunday dinners, I continued. Start slow. But you'll need to show me you understand what happened here, really understand it. I do, Mom, I will. I touched the new key in my pocket. I've changed the locks. When you're ready to have a key again, we'll talk about it. Later that evening, I sat at my kitchen table holding my American Express card. Such a small thing to cause so much trouble. I slipped it into the leather notebook wallet Tom had given me years ago, next to my driver's license, right where it belonged, under my control, ready for legitimate purchases only. The last thing I did before bed was set out my favorite teacup for morning. The paint crew would arrive early, and I wanted to watch them work while having my breakfast. As I climbed into bed, the house felt different, more mine than it had in months. Sleep came in light waves, and sometime before dawn, I heard the rumble of a truck turning onto my street. Hanson's crew, right on time. I lay there listening to car doors slam and quiet voices conferring about ladders and drop cloths. A new day was starting, and this time I knew exactly where I stood. The morning sun warmed my shoulders as I stepped onto my freshly painted porch. That soft blue-gray looked even better in the bright daylight, peaceful, like the calm after a storm. You know that feeling when everything finally settles into place? That's exactly how I felt standing there. Mrs. Chen from next door caught my eye and gave me one of those knowing nods. Word travels fast in our neighborhood, and by now everyone had heard about Jessica's conviction. The judge was right, she called over. Some people show their true colors eventually. I couldn't help but smile. Last week, I'd overheard her telling the mail carrier how Jessica had been caught funneling money into secret accounts, planning to abandon Michael once she'd forced the sale of my house. The story had spread like wildfire through our quiet streets, each retelling carrying its own dose of satisfaction. Beautiful color choice, Mrs. Chen added, gesturing at my porch. Much better than before. The paint crew had done an excellent job. 3. Careful coats that transformed more than just wood and railings. Every brush stroke felt like reclaiming another piece of my life. Standing there, I remembered all those evenings Tom and I had spent in the porch swing, watching the neighborhood children play. The memories felt clean again, no longer tainted by Jessica's schemes. My fingers found the American Express card in my cardigan pocket, the same card she'd tried to steal. Such a small thing to trigger such big changes. But then again, it wasn't really about the card, was it? It was about respect, about protecting what's yours, about standing up when someone tries to push you down. The new lock caught the sunlight as I tested it, clicking smoothly under my hand. No more unauthorized charges, no more family expenses that drained my accounts. The court orders had made sure of that, spelling out in black and white how Jessica Wu had abused my trust. The fraud conviction would follow her for years, a consequence she'd earned with every deception. Movement caught my eye, and I spotted Walter on the sidewalk. He raised his hand in greeting, and I felt a rush of gratitude. Without his steady guidance through the paperwork and court procedures, I might have lost everything to Jessica's manipulation. Instead, here I stood, home secure, credit protected, and my dignity restored. "Looking good up there, Margaret," he called. "Thanks to you," I answered, but he just shook his head modestly. A couple of young mothers passed by with their strollers, whispering as they glanced at my house. I caught fragments about Jessica's disgrace, about how she'd been exposed in court. "Can you imagine?" one said to the other. "Using her mother-in-law's identity like that?" The screen door whispered shut behind me as I turned to face the street. The morning air carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings. I thought about Michael, about the careful boundaries we'd need to rebuild, about the strength it takes to protect yourself without becoming bitter. Everything felt different now, cleaner, clearer. My pension was safe, my credit restored, and every decision about my future rested firmly in my own hands. Jessica had tried to paint me as a confused old woman, but she'd only managed to reveal her own true colors. Standing there on my newly painted porch, I finally understood the lesson that had carried me through this whole ordeal. It was something Tom used to say, though I'd never fully appreciated its weight until now. Respect is earned, not stolen. How right he'd been, and how good it felt to stand in that truth, on my own porch, in the morning sun.